Elliott from Center of Asset Education and Inclusion. We're really happy to have everybody here today. Unfortunately, we had some, we'll call it technical difficulties, and so we're starting a little bit late and scrambled, but we apologize for that. We're really glad that you could all make it today and be here. We have quite the panel with some really strong CSA programs in the field. They've been around for a number of years. We have some new data from them that we want to share with you. We're really excited that they could be here and be with us our first day in University of Michigan. This is the move for the Center on Asset Education and Inclusion to the University of Michigan. So really happy to have some of our not only partners but friends at this point in our lives here to share this moment with us. And we're really excited about the reports. Now you'll see on the website under the webinar where you registered, there are links to the reports. The reports are drafts at this point. We will be making some revisions to them, adding some takeaways, and then also adding an additional paper, which will be takeaways over the overall 4 programs, takeaways from the overall 4 programs. There's also some one-page reports there for quick ease of access, so hopefully you can take a look at those when you get some time. I'm going to turn it over to Melinda as fast as I can so we can get moving. But I do want to say one thing. We want to be sure that people understand that we're not trying to make comparisons between the programs, that the objective here is to get takeaways and learn from the different programs, but they're very different programs in the sense of geographic location, demographics of the programs, program structures, and we really didn't have a research design in which we could make comparisons between programs. So we like to think of the comparison really being CSA, no CSA. So if we didn't have CSAs in these locations, what could we expect to happen? And so with that spirit in mind, we're going to turn now to Melinda Lewis is going to moderate this part with Frank from Ford Foundation.
Hi, thank you, and thank you to those who are joining us. So we are grateful to have with us today Frank DiGiovanni, who really has spent more than 2 decades as an investor and champion in asset-based approaches to family and community strengthening. So Frank, we're going to ask you to first look back. When you review these reports and the conversation that you've been having with these programs, what do you see that surprises you based on what you might have expected when you started in this field?
Thank you, Melinda, and thank you, Willie, for inviting me here. This is very exciting to be here with 4 of the strongest children's development account programs in the U.S. So, your question really takes me back to when we started this work on children's savings accounts. I just retired from the Ford Foundation, and when I was at Ford, we began planning and investing in children's savings accounts in 2001. And when we began this work, we began this trying to develop children's savings accounts as a national policy. So our goal was to develop children's savings accounts as a national program. And we invested, along with the Charles Stewart Mott Foundation, in a national demonstration. And frankly, trying to develop state and local programs was the furthest thing from our mind, because we were hoping that we would see children's savings accounts developed as a national policy. And in fact, we began this work, as I said, in 2001. And in July 2004, Senators Corzine and Santorum introduced the Aspire Act. So we thought, in 3 years, wow, we were going to get national legislation. But unfortunately, it was introduced, but it didn't go anywhere. So I guess what surprised me was, we were getting national legislation, and then, whoops, it wasn't going anywhere. So I guess I'm surprised by the lack of momentum at the federal level, that in 2004 we had legislation introduced, but here we are in 2017, and we have no momentum at the federal level. But instead, we have tremendous interest and innovation occurring at the state and local level. Prosperity Now is estimated that there are now at least 42 programs in existence at the state and local level, being implemented by a variety of institutions with an incredible variety and creativity of designs. We have state and local governments, 529 plans, community foundations and nonprofits are implementing state children's savings accounts with a variety of designs and structures. So I'm really surprised by all that innovation and surprised but incredibly gratified. And I think we'll hear today from 4 of the programs, and you'll see that the structures are incredibly different, but incredibly successful and creative. So I guess that is what surprises me. No federal activity, but incredible creativity and innovation at state and local level that we never expected to happen.
So from where we are right now, Frank, that was the look back. As you look forward, what do you anticipate as some of the most important challenges that the CSA field is likely to face in the next few years?
Great. You know, I think for me, this tremendous adaptability of the children's savings account model, that it can be tailored to fit the needs and objectives of specific context, is a major strength of the model. But it poses a number of challenges. First, this proliferation of the CSA account designs and program models makes it difficult to identify what are the core or must-have features of CSA accounts and programs. So we've got all kinds of different models. We've got different financial institutions. We've got the models being offered through 529 plans, through credit account, through credit unions, through banks. We've got all kinds of different features, different incentives. But the research right now is unable to identify which features are most likely to produce specific outcomes. And it's not possible, at least currently, to disentangle the effects of specific features of the accounts and programs. But it is important to be clear whether and which designs are likely to produce the desired outcomes. Is it better to offer these through a 529 plan or through a credit union or a bank? And frankly, the potential trade-off between being responsive to the context and standardizing the accounts or models for scale is a real challenge. Ultimately, if we would like to get these children's savings accounts to scale at a national level, it's going to mean having to standardize. And that ultimately means trading off being responsive to context. So that's one challenge. How do we make these more standardized so that we can scale them? The second challenge is, frankly, funding for research is very hard to come by. The Ford Foundation, where I worked for 24 years, is no longer supporting children's savings accounts. And the foundation was one of the major funders of research. So funding is hard to come by, and it's very difficult to fund the research agenda that the field needs to move forward. Similarly, a number of the existing children's savings accounts programs will face sustainability challenges within a few years as their operations are being funded by time-limited sources of funding. Some of the programs in New England are funded by time-limited sources of funding. Those funding streams are going to run out in 2 to 3 years. Those states are going to struggle to figure out where their funding is coming from. So that's a second major challenge. Another challenge is, I think, we run the risk with all of the energy and innovation being devoted to promoting children's savings accounts at the state and local level. We run the risk of overlooking the necessary hard work of how we move from these state and local initiatives to national policy. We really need to think about how do we, as we're innovating at the state and local level and we're developing new programs every year, how do we get the energy and the momentum to get back to advocating and organizing for national policy? So those are, at least in my mind, some of the most important challenges.
So final question for you, Frank, before we turn to the programs. You referenced that research funding is hard to come by, but you also named some things that research needs to tell us if we're going to figure out how to best scale children's asset initiatives. So as somebody who's invested a lot in not just CSAs, but CSA research specifically, what do you think are the most important questions that we must come up with the collective resources to answer?
Right. So I had 4 categories of research that I think is important to do. The first is what I call impact research, which is to test hypotheses to identify the relationship between specific features of CSA accounts and programs and different outcomes. So for example, identifying the impact of children's savings accounts on outcomes beyond savings. Much of the conversation today will be on savings rates, take-up rates, and that's really important because it is the easiest thing to measure. Many of the politicians want to know, are people saving? How much are they saving? What's the take-up rate? And it's important because we all want people to save. The savings rates in this country are very low, but it isn't the only thing that's important about children's savings accounts. We really want to improve the educational aspirations on the part of parents and on the part of children themselves. So we want to measure educational aspirations. It's important to look at school performance and socio-emotional development of children. So it's important to look at the impact of CSAs on all of those things. But it's also important to identify the mechanisms through which the children's savings account programs work. How do we disentangle the separate impacts of these design features, the impact of the seed deposit, the match, and all the different high-touch features that are being incorporated into these programs now. But it's also important to test the impact of the size of the initial seed deposit on a range of outcomes. Much of what we know about the impact of children's savings accounts comes from the SEED Oklahoma randomized controlled trial demonstration, and that model provided a $1,000 seed deposit. That research indicated that many of the positive impacts on families, on socio-emotional development, on educational aspirations, on maternal depression were achieved even when families did not save themselves, and that was because of the $1,000 seed deposit. For example, would a much smaller seed deposit of $50 or $100 have the same impact? We can't answer that. So I think it's important to be able to look at the effect of programs that have smaller seed deposits on those same kinds of outcomes. I think we need much more research on what I'm calling process issues. For example, we need a much better understanding of what it takes to promote strong family engagement. And third, we need longitudinal research. I think it's critical that we be able to follow the children and their families at least through secondary school, through the end of secondary school, to see how having access to children's savings accounts affects the children as they move through high school. And it would be great to follow them through college as well. And finally, research on what I'm calling meta-analysis, to look across programs, now that we have these 42 programs, to look across these programs to see if we can make sense of how programs work in different contexts. Can we compare savings rates? Can we look at different kinds of family engagement strategies and see what kinds of effects they have on different savings rates, take-up rates, things like that? So those are at least 4 of the areas of research that I think are important. And thanks again for being able to contribute.
Thank you so much. Do you want to introduce the next program?
So we're going to have K2C go next.
Do you want to
Sure.
Okay, great. So I'm going to talk about San Francisco's Kindergarten to College program. Before I talk about the program, its design, and some of our findings, I just wanted to provide a little context. I can't seem to forward it. Is it just the arrow button? Oh, here we go. I just wanted to provide a little bit of context about economic insecurity in San Francisco. So in our city, 13% of our children live in poverty. And if you look at the heat map, you'll notice darker regions. And in those regions, we have anywhere from 1/3 of children to over 40% of children who are living in poverty. 1/3 of our children are born into families with no savings or assets, and this is even higher for children who are African American and Latino. 47% of our families are financially insecure, meaning they have less than $2,000 in savings. And a survey of kindergarten to college families found that for 1/5 of them, financial hardship is the main barrier to start saving in their accounts. I'm sorry. Some technical difficulties moving these slides forward.
You should be able to advance it now.
Oh, okay, great, thank you. So the kindergarten to college program was launched in the spring of 2011 as the first universal public match children's savings program in the country. And it opens an account for all children as they enter kindergarten in San Francisco Unified School District. The program has 4 core goals. One is to create a college-going culture and to really help students feel that college is attainable for them. 2 is to reduce financial exclusion, and that's really the universal access of the program where everyone receives an account as they enter kindergarten in our public schools. 3 is to increase financial literacy with the goal of integrating financial education into the school curriculums and to link that education to an action, which is the K2C accounts. And 4 is to leverage private investment for good, having private funds support the savings of families through matches. Key design features of the program, as I mentioned, it's auto enrollment opt-out. So all children are enrolled by default. It's universal, so all incoming kindergartners at San Francisco Unified School District receive an account. There's commitment from the city, so it's publicly funded, both in initial seed money that goes into the account, but also to administratively run the program. There's a matched savings component of it to help encourage and engage families to save. There's a range of deposit options to make savings more accessible for families. And then there's financial education to strengthen financial capability of children as well. So the city seeds every account with $50. And then families have 4 key ways currently of contributing, either mail, a bank branch, direct deposit, or online through bill pay. The accounts are set up so they don't affect families' eligibility for public assistance, and they're free, so there's no fees associated with the accounts. The way the account works is the school district provides the kindergarten to college program with information about the students, and that information is used to create sub-accounts for each child. And so the city is the custodian on the account, and each individual child has a sub-account. The parents then receive a welcome kit with the account number to make deposits. Parents can also register their accounts online so they can view account activity and balance information. The city and the kindergarten to college program tracks incentives and matches. And then money is held in a trust in the child's name until used for post-secondary education. In between when the account is opened and post-secondary education, if there are any emergencies, then families can withdraw as well. So currently, in addition to the initial seed money, families are eligible for free and reduced lunch incentive if they qualify for free and reduced lunch. They're also eligible for a one-to-one match up to $100. A save steady incentive, so if they save regularly for 6 consecutive months, then they receive an additional $100 incentive. And then other incentives are considered if funds are available. So to date, as we enter this current school year, we'll be at 90 schools. And we'll be reaching a quarter of our 7th graders, half of our 6th graders, and for the first time, we'll be at reaching all students at all our elementary schools. We're currently at 26,000, but we'll be above 30,000 as we enroll the incoming kindergartners, which will be half of our students at SF Unified School District. To date, the accounts have 4.7 million in them, and families have contributed 2.6 million. 17% of our families have contributed in their account, and for those that have contributed, they have average savings of $575. We also know that about 50% of our savers qualify for free and reduced lunch. And then our families that are African American that are saving in the program have saved on average $474, and our Latino Hispanic families have saved on average $534 in their accounts. And once again, those are actual family contributions. So now have it paused on me again. Okay. So now I just want to spend a few minutes and talk a little bit about some of our current efforts to strengthen engagement of students and also engagement at the schools. So one is we are a universal program in that all kindergartners receive an account, and it's an opt-out program, but we are very much focused on a more targeted approach in both outreach and engagement. It's really important for us in the program that we're focused on equity. And so this graph might be a little bit hard to see, but what you see on the vertical is savings rate, and horizontally you see savings rate, and vertically you see poverty rate. And this is by neighborhood in San Francisco. And so what we're really focused on is that upper left area where you have families who are living in more low income, high poverty neighborhoods in San Francisco, where savings rate is also lower.
Put it on the screen.
You have to move the cursor to the top screen.
Thank you. We're also focused on strengthening awareness and engagement of our families. We'll be sending out welcome and welcome back kits to all participants with their K-to-C activity statements. This is the first year that we'll be able to produce the statements and send it to families so they are aware of what is in their account. And we'll also use that as an opportunity to frame the message to participants by their engagement in those accounts. So whether they're new participants, whether they're existing participants, but they haven't saved in the program, or they've saved in the program but haven't maxed out on the incentives. We're also going to explore conducting an experiment to test communication strategies for non-savers and new participants, which are our largest number of participants in the program. Once again, thank you. This is the first year, as I mentioned, that we are reaching all students in elementary schools, and so this is a great opportunity for us to strengthen engagement of the schools. And so one effort we're going to be working on is designing and utilizing school scorecards to let schools know where they stand in savings behavior for their families and their children, and how that compares to schools that we've identified as top achievers, but all schools overall. We're also continuing to look for new ways to really reach families where they are to engage them in the program. And so looking to pilot test opportunities to increase the savings channels through which families can make deposits. And then also looking to strengthen engagement of the schools and our community-based organizations to engage them not just in outreach activities, but actual savings activities. So branch field trips, as well as college saving days, which are days in which people can come and make deposits to the CBOs and to the schools, and then they would in turn deposit that money into the branch. And then finally, we're focused on redesigning the incentive program for K2C. This is both to strengthen engagement, but also to ensure sustainability of the program, as we are going to be expanding to over 30,000 students, and that'll continue to increase over time. So one of the incentives is really to encourage families to register on the portal. To date, we have low registration, and we know that's a great way for someone to be engaged in their account, to be able to talk to their students about the account, and it also provides an additional communication channel for us to then directly engage with the families. And so we're looking to provide a $20 K2C account registration bonus for anyone who registers their account. We also know that it's important to engage someone sooner in the account rather than later. We see amongst a subset of our savers that are really engaged, they acted within that first year and acted a few months into account opening. And so we want to create an urgency to act and reward an active saving and time bound it to try to encourage someone to act sooner rather than later. And all this with the goal of increasing our savings rate. And so people would receive a one-time bonus if they made a contribution before the end of the year. And then we also want to continue to encourage frequency of savings to help families build an ongoing savings habit. We see right now that of the subset of savers, a third of them save only once. And so we want to try to encourage families to save more. But we also want to make sure that we can engage participants who can't always save in every month. We also think it's important to provide immediate rewards upon saving, so someone doesn't have to wait after consecutive months of saving to be rewarded. And then we continue to believe that time bounding it could encourage them to engage in their account sooner rather than later. So we'll be offering a $10 save monthly bonus. So any month you save at least $10, you'd be rewarded with an immediate $10 bonus, and then you're eligible to receive a total of $60 for any 6 months of saving, and that would expire at the end of the year. That's all I have. Thank you.
So I'll let Nick introduce himself, but next we're going to go to Nick Swerson from there. If you can switch this.
Sure. Thank you for having me. So I'm just going to provide a little bit of information from a study that that Willie's team and I have been doing with support from the Ford and Kellogg Foundations, focused on the K2C program. Some of it's similar to what you just saw, but we're also just going to provide a little bit more information to contextualize some of the findings from this program. So just to get started here, we really had 3 main research questions that were driving the study. The first one was focused on the extent to which families are contributing to their K2C CSAs and how those savings behaviors change over time. Our second question was then zeroing in on those families and students who had a contribution to their account, looking at whether the different types of savings, for example, total account value, total contribution value, number of contributions, whether they differ for students that are coming from lower or higher poverty schools. And then lastly, we were interested in looking at what are the student and school level characteristics associated with whether a student has at least one contribution to his or her CSA. So looking at that first question, whether families make a contribution to their account and how do those savings behaviors change over time. We see overall, looking at accounts that have been open for up to 4 years, that in general about one out of 5 students has a contribution to their account. That's 18%. It varies slightly from the percentage you just saw, which was 17.4, I think. And that's just because this is a little bit different data set that we were looking at savings behaviors up to July of 2016. Looking more specifically here, this particular figure shows the cumulative percentage of families and students that have a contribution to their account over time. So we see that in the first year that an account is opened, about 15% of families have made a contribution to that account. That rises to 19% by year 4. So there are really a fair number of families that are making contributions later and not necessarily participating in the first year, but it is clear here that the vast majority of them are making that first contribution in the first year. We also looked at the average number of contributions over time, so looking at just the frequency with which they're making contributions in each year as the account gets older. So in the first year, we see that on average, this is among families that have made at least one contribution, that the average is 5 contributions per year, and that really that declines over about 4 years to about 2.6 contributions per year. We do also see some trends that show that some families are stopping their contributions over time. So as we mentioned, most of the initial contribution happened during the first year. We see that 43% of families who contributed in the first year did not make any contributions in subsequent years. 14% of families who contributed in years 1 and 2 did not make contributions in subsequent years. And then similarly, 7% of families who contributed in years 1 through 3 stopped contributing in the 4th year. So we think this highlights some interesting questions about both how to facilitate engagement and in getting families to participate and to make contributions to get them started, but also to maintain those contributions over time. When we look at the size of individual contributions over time, we see a similar decline from the first year to the 4th year. Families are making larger contributions on average. In year 1, $36, which declines to $13 by year 4. Okay, so turning to that second research question, just for those students and families that have a contribution to their account, we looked at whether these types of savings behaviors differed for higher or lower poverty schools. And I just wanted to explain briefly how we determined whether a school was high or low poverty. We used the common Title I threshold of approximately 75% free or reduced price lunch or higher. And that, to contextualize this is San Francisco, so it may differ from national averages, but that seemed to be a benchmark that seemed plausible for looking at this higher versus lower poverty distinction. In general, we see that families from lower poverty schools are more likely to contribute. That's not too surprising, though we were also pleased to see that the difference was not necessarily as big as you would expect. Really only 5% difference there, 15 versus 20%. Between students coming from higher versus lower poverty schools. And I do want to emphasize that when I'm talking about this poverty dynamic, that this is a characteristic of the school, that we're not talking about families who are higher or lower poverty. We weren't able to have access to that information for these analyses. So it's useful to think about this as a context in which kids are experiencing their education and whether that would be affecting their participation in the program. We also see that families from lower poverty schools make more contributions over time, and that difference between families in higher or lower poverty schools becomes statistically significant in year 3 and year 4. So we can see it's generally growing at similar rates, but that it's diverging pretty notably by year 4. And we would have to look at subsequent years now to see whether that same trend continues. Similarly, they're also families from lower poverty schools are making larger contributions. So these are the dollars in their account that are just from their contributions, not from the incentives or not from the seed deposit. But we see that on average, families from lower poverty schools are making larger contributions to their accounts over time. Okay, so lastly, we're interested in what student and school level characteristics were associated with whether a student has at least one contribution to their CSA. We looked at really a wide range of school characteristics, everything you can imagine from publicly available data and other sources. We really found 2 that we think maybe tell somewhat of an interesting story that we need to think further about. But in general, we find that among higher poverty schools, lower truancy appears to buffer higher poverty schools from decreased contribution activity. So we see and hear that in higher poverty schools, if you're high poverty and high truancy as a school, 12% of your students have a contribution to their account. Whereas if you're high poverty and low truancy, that number is 21%. And you can see how that compares with lower poverty schools where truancy doesn't seem to matter much. We also see a similar dynamic with higher math proficiency. So higher math proficiency also appears to buffer higher poverty schools from decreased contribution activity. If you look here again, if you're a higher poverty school and have higher math proficiency, 25% of your students have a contribution to their account, in contrast to only 13% if you're lower math proficiency and high poverty. It's really important to look at these with caution. It's very difficult to ascertain any kind of causality here. These are just correlations. And of course, higher math proficiency in a school and lower truancy in a school, even within a higher poverty context, could be correlated with a number of different kinds of things, including the demographics of the school, the principal leadership. There's a lot of different kinds of variables here that could be driving some of these differences in participation rates. But we thought that this was useful, at least as a signal for where to conduct some further research. So just a couple take-home points, I think, from this. Approximately 1 in 5 families in an opt-out program like KTC are making contributions over time, though we do see that these contributions wane as over the years. We also see that the families in higher poverty schools are contributing, though contributions are smaller and less frequent. And lastly, that lower school truancy rates and higher math proficiency may buffer higher poverty schools from decreased contributions. Couple of next steps. This study is completed, and I think this report is now published on the website. We're currently finishing up another study that's looking at academic outcomes, both academic outcomes associated with implementation of the program, providing the accounts to all students, but also looking at, for those students who have a contribution to their account, do we see better outcomes for those students when we match them with similar peers who don't have a contribution to their account? And I think those findings and reports will be released in the coming months. We're good.
Thanks, Nick. Next, we can go to Prosperity Works with Ona, but we don't have slides, so don't expect slides there. And then we'll want to shift over to Megan O'Brien from ADI, and she will go over some of the descriptive data. Unlike K2C's case, the data we're presenting from here on out is purely descriptive data on the savings. Thanks.
Thank you, Willie. Prosperity Kids is a program that really is unique in the nation in that we believe that parent engagement is critical to the future orientation of children and also the family's ability to save. As a result of that, we engage families early in 10 weeks of child development and community leadership training, and also financial capability training. When they complete that, their children from birth to 11 all have accounts open for them at the Rio Grande Credit Union with $100. And then we match family money up to $200 a year for 10 years. Another unique characteristic is that families also are eligible to open an emergency savings account. For most of our families, they are unbanked or underbanked. So having the opportunity to participate in a financial institution is something that we think is critical to financial inclusion, and that financial inclusion is critical to financial security over a lifetime. So those accounts are open with a small amount of money, but we put incentive deposits into those for 5 years for things that the families do to support healthy outcomes for their children. And they also have a secured credit card attached, so families can build credit. Now, when we were thinking about the emergency savings account, there were a couple of factors that were really important. First of all, the children's accounts are custodial accounts, so the parents have no access to those. Those are for the exclusive use of children for post-secondary education when they graduate high school, or for a stable transition into adulthood when they each reach 23, if they have not used the account for higher education previously. So this, with parents having invested in these accounts, could be a point of conflict within the family when there's an emergency need and families have no access to that account. So the emergency accounts serve that purpose. Another thing that we know about emergency accounts, or having accounts or money that is available in an emergency, is it stabilizes families financially and emotionally, not just in the emergency, but over time. The other thing is that it was critical in our minds to keep families out of the predatory lending industry when there was a financial crisis, because we know if they get trapped in that, their ability to save is significantly compromised. So all of these elements come together for the purpose of creating Prosperity Kids. Now, it is our belief that there's a three-legged stool of controlling one's future and achieving one's goals. And that three-legged stool is personal capital, social capital, and financial capital. So we build all of those at one time. The one other thing to know is that all of these accounts and this whole initiative with a budget for 500 children over the 10-year period was $1.25 million. And that money has been almost exclusively contributed from private sources. That would be from individuals, from foundations, and from businesses and banking. We now are in a stage of trying to expand beyond the initial pilot, and we've done that with the help of Southwest Capital Bank that has allowed us to invest in middle school students at Washington Middle School who are engaged in the AVID program, and we're investing there for the third year in a row this year. They also, Southwest Capital has asked us to go to Mora County to work with the Head Start kids and families there. Another interesting expansion is actually to look at the St. Joe's Foundation in Albuquerque and their graduating class of 300 families that have been engaged for 3 years continuously. And as a next step, they are considering these Prosperity Kids accounts for the children who are and families who are graduating. So it's been a kind of a onesie-twosie approach to expansion, but now we also have a work group that was mandated by a memorial in our last legislative session, which is looking at what the opportunities are for public funding. We should have recommendations from that group in October to our legislature. So we think it is critical that public money be invested in order to reach the kind of scale we need to reach in New Mexico so that all children have the opportunity and an expectation that they will go to college.
So this is Megan O'Brien from the University of Kansas with AEDI, and I'm going to just very briefly present some summary statistics of the savings data from Prosperity Kids. So the data I'll be presenting represents 509 accounts that were opened between, May 2014 through December 2016. There. Yeah. So just overall, so you know what the kids look like in these accounts. On average, they're 7 years old, and the accounts have been open for about 21 months. 50% of the kids are male, so we'd expect that. And then based on what Ona described about the population, mostly Hispanic, 60% English language learner, and then 80% of the children in the accounts are eligible for free and reduced lunch. So with our summary statistics, one of the main things we do is we always pull out the subset of what we call savers. So those are accounts that have a contribution made above and beyond any startup incentive or program match. And so for Prosperity Kids, we had 46% of the accounts are savers. Sorry, I'm trying to get to the next slide.
You should be able to.
Okay. So in the far right column there is where we break out the subset of savers. So 226 kids, that's 46%. And basically this allows you just to see what kind of dollar values have accrued with these accounts. The total account value, so that includes everything, the incentive and the match and any family contributions. On average, the accounts have $492 in them for the savers. I'm just going to go down the savers column for time. The median amount is $370. The family contribution portion of that on average is $211 with a median of $133. So, and Willie, jump in if there's something you want to point out about any of these for sure, and Ona as well. And then one other thing, we further cut the data to kind of look at the tenure of the account, see what's happening over time. So here we broke it up into accounts that were open, the newer accounts 7 to 12 months, all the way down to the accounts that have been open the longest, 25 months or more. And you'll see that the proportion of savers in each of those tenure groupings increases over time, which is what you would expect. The longer you've had your account open, the more likely you are to have a chance to make a contribution and become a saver. The column labeled average number of quarterly deposits, what this indicates is the number of different quarters in which accounts made deposits. So if, let's just take the row for the accounts that were open 19 to 24 months. That means on average, these accounts are making a deposit in 3 different quarters over those 2 years. So it's an indicator kind of regularity of savings, which is what we're interested in. And then you see the average family contributions are increasing the longer the account has been open, starting the shortest account tenure is $154 on average, up to $259 and $229 for the older accounts. And that's paralleled, of course, you'd expect the average overall account value parallels that as well, from $390 up to $553. So that's just a really quick overview of the savings data for Prosperity Kids so far.
Good afternoon. My name is Clint Kugler with Promise Indiana. Promise Indiana was born in Wabash County, Indiana, as an attempt to address opportunities for all kids in our community to harness the power of asset building. Our program is rooted in community-driven approach with support from our College Choice 529 program. When we looked at the data and we look at our demographics, we have a high level of low-income students. It's a rural community. And we looked and saw that only 6% of kids in our community had a college savings account. And compare that to the national data. Nationally, less than 3% of kids have that college savings account, and in Indiana about 10%. And so we wanted to move the needle. And can we layer in, through community-driven approaches, opportunities for kids of all income groups to take these important steps to activate families to be part of their own solution and harness that power of community. We developed a program working with school corporations, working with various different entities, economic development, community foundations, schools, nonprofits, faith community, to make sure that community was coming around each child, and then allow children to be part of their own solution, dream about what they want to be, have some experiences, and then turn them loose to engage champions in their lives. So you're going to hear a little bit about savings data a little bit later from Megan, but also let me just get fast forward and share with you what we've been able to do over these last 4 years. We started in Wabash County, Indiana, but over the last 4 years, we've grown the program. Now 18 communities throughout Indiana are doing this. This is not a replication process, it's an activation process where we work to get communities to build a strategy to create these opportunities to be able to introduce asset building and college savings for all kids. To date, we've helped over 11,000 kids establish college savings accounts, and over $4 million worth of assets have been built for those kids. I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Phil Marizzi, and he's going to share with you a little bit about the program components and then about some of the layering approach that we're deploying in community to create these opportunities.
So yeah, as Clint mentioned, we have 18 counties across the state of Indiana that have activated this program, and there's 4 main components that each of those 18 counties will implement. First part is that registration process where we want to have families or guardians sign up their child for College Choice 529 account. And when they take that first step, we're going to reward that behavior with an initial seed deposit of $25. We want to plant that first seed of hope, and that's the community telling that family and that child that we believe in you. So we get that account established. Second step is college and career discovery in the classroom, where now in the classroom we're having teachers talk about who are the champions in your life, who are the people that are going to help you reach your goals someday, what challenges do you want to help solve someday. We like to joke that these kids come up with pretty funny answers of what they want to do when they grow up. A little kid might want to be an angry bird someday, but that creates an opportunity for a teacher to talk about, well, then you need to have a love of math so that you can design the next Angry Bird game. And they're tying that back to the asset, to the $25 that the community gave them. So that's the second step. Third step, which is one of our favorite parts of the program, is we take these kids and we put them on a college campus so they can feel what it's like to be a college student, and they can see their future selves in that place. So college isn't for kids that have lots of money or go to the nice school in town. It's for kids like me, and I know that because I'm here right now. So that's the third step. Fourth step is the champion process. And again, in the classroom, they're identifying who are the people in my life that are going to help me reach my goals someday. That might be a picture of grandma. That might be a pastor. It might be a neighbor. It might be mom and dad or a sister. But they're identifying that in the classroom, and then we equip them to go out and raise funds from those champions. And what happens if a child turns in a paper and there's only one circle filled in? That creates an opportunity for the community then to be a champion for that child as well. And when they raise $25, then we reward that with $75 match into that account. The whole program is based on you take a step, we're going to take a step with you, you take a step, and we're going to take a step with you. Yes, we want to increase the assets, but we also want to see behaviors along the way. And as far as Clint mentioned, we want to layer in additional partnerships then to bring additional assets to these families. We know some of our families don't have the resources to continually save ongoing in such a way that it really makes a dent in paying for college. And so we want to bring those assets to them. So just really quickly, a couple of partnerships we've created through the leadership of the Charles Stewart Mott Foundation, as well as the Community Foundation of Wabash County. We're launching what's called Promise Scholarships. And this is where we award actual college scholarships for 4th through 8th graders into their 529 accounts. And so when that 4th grader sets that reading goal with their teacher in the classroom, we can put $10 in their 529 account, and we reward that behavior. When a family makes a $10 quarterly deposit into their 529, we reward that with a match. When the family shows up to a college night or a FAFSA workshop, we can reward that behavior with a scholarship into their account. And one of the main reasons why we want to do that is when people typically apply for a community foundation scholarship, they are already college bound. They're already on that trajectory. So what about all the kids that check out in 4th grade or in 5th grade? We want to keep them plugged into school, reward the behaviors that we know will lead to future success. Another opportunity that we're really excited about, the Indiana Housing and Community Development Authority in Indiana. They oversee the IDA program as well as the Housing Authority. We're launching a program where the Housing Authority gives out low interest loans to developers to develop low-income housing each year. Developer pays back the interest payment to the authority. And now moving forward, the authority is going to allow those developers to pay that interest payment back into a 529 for kids in that development or for a school near that development. So we're telling these families, yes, you're in subsidized housing right now, but we don't want you to be there forever. And education is your key to getting out of this. And now that developer, going back to our model, is now a champion. And that's just another person in that kid's life that's saying, we believe in you, and we're backing that up with scholarships. Indiana University Kokomo, same approach. We're pushing kids to college. Now IUK is pulling them, and they just awarded every 8th grader in Wabash County a $1,000 scholarship to come to their university, saying just like we would recruit an athlete to come to our school, we're going to recruit you because we see value in you, and we're backing that up again with a tangible asset. Last partnership I'll mention, and it's a local one in Wabash County, family optometry. An optometrist came to us and said, hey, I have all these kids that come in every year for their yearly eye exam, and I would love to reward something into their account and tell them I believe in them. So every time they come in now to get their eyes checked, he's putting $5.29 into their account. But more importantly, he's telling that child, I believe in you, and then I'm backing that up with the tangible assets. So again, layer in additional assets, but let's reward that with the identity piece. And then hopefully as we build that out through the K-12 spectrum, at the end of that, we have substantial assets for the families.
It's the identity-based motivation theory is woven into each of those. That's the group congruence. That's the normalization of difficulty, and that's the salience that my future and what's coming down the pipe is front of mind. That's key to the success of our effort. And through partnership with AEDI, research on parental expectations and the link to increased math and reading scores as an interim measure of the impact that these assets and this experience is having on these kids are available on our website. And through AEDI, you can visit promiseindiana.org for additional information.
Okay, so I just need, okay, it's working. So here's just some overview of some savings data. This is just for Wabash County for Promise Indiana. As Clinton Phil mentioned, there are many more counties enrolled, but this is just for one county. So these would be representing 1,663 accounts that opened from the start of Promise Indiana in 2013 through the fall. It would have been the fall of 2016, but the actual savings data I'm showing you here is really current. It's for deposits made through June, just this past June. So what this slide is showing is the enrollment rate for Promise in Wabash County. And in the first year, the blue bar would be the first year of Promise in 2013. That's when we saw the highest uptake across the board. And the other takeaway point from this across the board is that kindergarten is where we see the most uptake. And that's generally because, especially after the first year, enrollment was focused mostly on kindergarten. But the uptake rates are pretty good nonetheless across the years. So here again, we pull out one of our main groups of interest are the savers. So those are families that have contributions made to their accounts above and beyond any startup incentive or program match. And so it was 44%, I believe, of the accounts for Promise Indiana are what we call savers, which is really nice. 44% of the accounts had additional savings contributions made. So the average total account value among the savers is $524 compared to non-savers, it's $254. The median's also quite a bit higher at $168. And then the average family contributions that the savers are making is $412 with a median of $60. And there's quite a range from people that have just put in a little bit to a few accounts that have some major contributions. This next slide breaks it down and looks at the account tenure, or how long the account has been open. So the blue and red bars are values for just the savings subpopulation. So in the blue, you can see the total account value, the average total account value for savers, and the red bar is the average family contribution for the savers. And what you can see is the longer the account has been open, the greater the values get. Obviously, they're going to accumulate assets over time, so that's good to see. And then the green bar is just kind of a reference comparison point of the total account value for the whole population overall. So you can see how that compares to just the subset of savers. I don't think there was anything else about this slide, but if anyone has anything, just jump in. I think there was just one more for Promise. One additional breakdown is for the subgroup of savers. We were able to break it down by what we called poor and non-poor, and this is based on an indicator, individual level indicator for free and reduced lunch eligibility. So among the savers, 31% of those families are eligible for free and reduced lunch. And you can see here, if you look at the mean, the overall account value looks quite a bit higher for the non-poor families. But it is interesting to note, if you look at the median, the overall account values and overall family contributions are actually pretty similar. So we think that's an encouraging sign that poor and non-poor families are both saving. I don't know, did you want to say that any different way? Okay. So I think that's my last slide for the summary of the savings data for Promise, and there's more in the reports online.
So this is Colleen Quint from the Harold Alphon College Challenge in Maine, and I've got a deck of slides about to get called up here. There we go, great. So the Harold Alphon College Challenge is the name of the program that we run. What we do is we award $500 at birth to all babies born as Maine residents. We are a universal, statewide, and automatic program. And unlike a number of the other programs in the area, we actually, the origin of our program comes from a businessman and philanthropist named Harold Alphon. And there's a wonderful story. He gave $500 for college to each of his grandchildren when they were born, and then he thought to himself, well, why shouldn't every Maine baby have what my grandchildren have? So I always think that's a pretty great story, and it's a great sense of his generosity of spirit and of fact. So the history of the program is we started in 2008. It was a pilot year just at 2 hospitals in Waterville, Maine, which is Mr. Alphon's hometown, where we did, again, the $500 at birth. And it was an opt-in model then. Families were required to open a Maine 529 account by the child's first birthday. After the 1-year pilot at those 2 hospitals, we moved statewide in 2009, continuing with the opt-in model. We had between those 2, the pilot and the 2009 through 2012, about 25,000 total families opened accounts and were awarded the Alphon grant. And then in 2013, we made the move to what we call automatic or universal enrollment, so that every Maine resident baby is now automatically awarded the Alphon grant without having to take any action. And we're at almost 49,000 children in the opt-out or universal mode. You can see here very quickly the totals during the opt-in period, about $12.5 million for 25,000 Maine babies. And our take rate was about 40%. So that means about 40% of eligible babies during that time had accounts opened on their behalf. And then since we moved to the transition to universal enrollment, the cumulative figures here since the inception of the program, we're now at, as of August, $38 million invested for 76,000 Maine babies. And that's a lot of babies in a state the size of Maine, let me just say. So who's involved and how do we do it? The WHO, again, it's a private family foundation. Mr. Alphon's Legacy Foundation, the Harold Alphon Foundation, provides the funding. I'm with the Alphon Scholarship Foundation, which is a not-for-profit. And then we also partner very closely with the Finance Authority of Maine, or FAME, which is a quasi-governmental agency. How we do this is birth data. Now that in the universal era, the birth data goes to FAME. FAME maintains the database. And then we fund the $500 into an omnibus account that we own. So the program, you'll see in the bottom right corner here of the slide, is a Venn diagram that shows the 3 core elements of the program: enrollment, family savings, and education messaging. By enrollment, we simply mean making sure that children have the account. So when it was an opt-in, we did a lot of outreach and activities to get families signed up. Now we do that automatically. The family savings piece is because the funding is in an omnibus account for the universal children, even though no one's required to open an account, the family needs to have their own vehicle to put their own money in if they wish to do so. And the educational messaging are the aspirational and readiness research and work that we do with families to encourage college going. It's also, I just want to make an important note around the family savings piece. Because we work in a 529 model in a broker-dealer relationship, then the Alphon Scholarship Foundation is not authorized to promote or open next-gen accounts. And that's where our partnership with FAME is so important, because they're the entity that is able to do that. So in our program, we have about, I think I mentioned already, about 12,000 babies born in Maine each year. And I'm a staff of 1. So we are by definition going to be a low-touch rather than a high-touch model. But we enhance that with communications, technology, and partnerships in addition to the critical partnership we have with FAME. So the first piece here, just a quick slide to show you every quarter starting at about 9 months old, babies receive, or the parents of the children receive, this statement from us that shows, it's a little hard to see on the screen, but it does 2 things. The most important thing is it shows the value of the Alphon grant. So it started at $500, and then it will show you what it's worth as of the close of the most recent quarter. And then we also provide tips to parents. So it's every quarter we do different themes. So literacy, financial literacy, health and wellness, and science and math. And we then break it down so that they're age appropriate tips for the age of the child. And what we know from the focus groups we've done with families is even though it's an omnibus account and families don't have their own account, they do get this communication from us that really makes that linkage for them that this is real money in a real account dedicated to my child and someone else has made that investment. So like Clint was talking about a minute ago, the notion of somebody else making an investment in my child is very, very powerful for families. So this is a really important tool for us. We have a couple of websites for the program. The 500forbaby.org is what we think of as the starter site for new families. It talks about the program and how it works. There's information on how to update contact information. FAME owns this account or this website so that if a family wants to open their own account, they're able to do that through here. We've now just opened this new site, myalphongrant.org. We launched that back in February, I guess it was. And that site can do a couple of things. This part of the site is a site that was developed by the Alphon Scholarship Foundation, and it has resources and information for families. So they can go in and look, again, kind of age-based, or if you're the parent of a second grader, or if you are a middle school student. Our kids aren't quite that old yet, but we're getting ready for them. Then there's information and resources. We're developing out a new part of that site that would help families plan for their child's future and talk about some of the activities that the other programs have talked about. We're planning to do with families, and it's a place where they could then develop their own plan for how they would do those things. And then very importantly on the site, you can click through from the front page over to a site that's owned and maintained by FAME, where families put in verifying information. They can now see the value of that Alphon grant online and can sign up for electronic delivery of those grant updates. I also mentioned the partnerships, which are very important for us. So the hospitals are key partners in Maine. We worked with them very closely in the first 5 years in the opt-in model because that was the first place that families heard about the Alphon grant that was available, and they encouraged families to complete paperwork and get more information about how to enroll their child. Now it's an automatic enrollment, but the hospitals continue to be really important partners for us because they raise awareness and they're a trusted source for families. They also are very practical in the help they provide by collecting contact information. There's a little contact card and a congratulations card that we give to families at the hospital and then at home at about 1 month. And a lot of the main hospitals help us collect that contact information, which when you get to a scale of 76,000 kids, maintaining good contact information is half the battle. We also work, the Harold Alphon Foundation is a significantly sized foundation with a lot of resources. They make an extraordinary commitment to both the grants as well as the operational costs of the program. But every foundation and every organization doing good work likes to have partners involved with them. And so other foundations have stepped forward in Maine to provide seed or incentive grants to targeted families. So we did an initiative with Head Starts in 4 different counties in Maine. And when those families worked with FAME to open accounts, then the foundations provided seed money of $50 or $100 into those accounts. Again, no longer required, but we're still wanting to encourage families to think about the savings that they could do and build on. We're hoping to work with libraries around the state, and with our oldest universal babies heading into kindergarten soon, we'll be in a position to begin working with the Maine schools very shortly. So in fact, perfect segue to this slide right here. So just to give you a sense, because we start at birth, our oldest kids are still only entering the 3rd and a handful into the 4th grade this fall. So we still have quite a horizon to go until they graduate from high school, which is why this interim measures research work that we're doing with the AEDI is so important to us. As I mentioned a moment ago, the first of our universal babies enter kindergarten in the fall of 2018. So that's a big threshold moment for us as we're anticipating having, all the kids in a classroom will have the Alphon grant, not just 40% or so of the kids. And so what are the opportunities to work with schools in ways that K2C has and Prosperity Kids and certainly Promise Indiana as well. And then our pilot year babies, it's just a small number, just a few hundred kids, but they'll be entering middle school in the fall of 2019. And that's important for us because we're looking ahead to when we'll be able to do more direct interaction with the kids themselves. Right now, all the communication is geared towards parents, so getting to the kids. And these are important for us because we're thinking about those watershed moments for kids and parents, those critical transition points into kindergarten, into middle school, and then, of course, into high school and then college after that. 2 last very quick slides about the Maine context to give you a sense about the demographics of where we're doing our work. The state of Maine, or as I like to call it, the great state of Maine, has has about 1.3 million people in it. We are we are 94.8% white. So that's what happens when you're way up in the Northeast. But we do have pockets of significant cultural diversity in the state, in particular Portland and Lewiston, which are two of our larger communities, have about 25% of their enrolled students are English language learners. We are, however, a predominantly rural state, median household income a little under 50,000. And we do have the largest population in New England of children living in low-income working families at about 42%. The education in Maine, we have a pretty traditionally high school graduation rate of 88%, lower rate of going on to college, only about 29% of adults hold a BA or higher, about 40% hold an associate's degree. And if you look at the next bullet there, you'll see that we have, like a lot of states, significant change in the economy, moving away from traditional industries to jobs where 66% of job openings will require education beyond high school. And the map's a little bit faded there, but excuse me, that shows all the main counties, and there's only basically Cumberland County in the lower left corner there that's dark that has a relatively high educational attainment rate, but overall in the state, including vast swaths of northern and western Maine, have very low educational attainment rates, and that's where the economy is undergoing the greatest transition. My very last slide here is it's a picture of Mr. Alfond down in the lower right corner there. And his real vision and motivation for the program was twofold. I like to talk about it both the micro and the macro levels. So at the micro level, it was about opportunity for Maine kids through access to higher education, so real money in a real account for individual children. But the macro level was also really important to him. It's about the prosperity of the state through improved educational outcomes and therefore a more educated workforce. So that's what we're working on in Maine.
Okay, so some summary savings data for Maine. So we're looking at, here we go. So we're looking at account data from 2009 through, these would be accounts enrolled through March 2013. So it's just over 18,000 accounts, but the savings data, just like with Promise, is very current. It's through June 2017. So first we can see the uptake rate for each year. And so after the first year in 2010, they started the marketing campaign. So you can see quite a big increase up to 36 and closer to 40% uptake each year. Can you do the thing? And again, we have our subset of savers pulled out. So again, this is accounts where a contribution was made above and beyond the initial Alfond grant startup or any other grants or other program contributions. So here for Maine, 40% of those accounts were savers. And the total this is the only program where we have not just the contribution values, but also any earnings off the investments. So the total account value, which includes all those the interest earnings and that kind of thing, the average for the accounts is 6,330 with a median of 3,081. And there's quite a large range from 741 to 359,000. So quite a range there. And then if I'll just go down to the family contribution, so on average, the family contribution amount of the savers is 3,700 with a median of 1,400. And again, quite a range from some families. They're considered savers, although they haven't saved maybe just one time, and to some accounts with quite a large contribution. And is this, yeah, that's the only other slide we have for Maine. So this slide has a lot in it, and what we tried to do here is show the relative proportion of the different components of what makes up the total asset value. So the family contributions are in yellow, and they make up, you know, a certain proportion of the total. Then there's the other grants and the Alfond startup grant. And then the asset difference is extra earnings on the accounts. So what's interesting here is that the family contribution dollar values are fairly similar in the lowest 3 income categories, and it doesn't really jump up until you get to the 75 to 150,000. So you can see that in the yellow portion of the bars, and then also and just the proportions across the board of each component of the total asset value are pretty similar until you get up into the higher income brackets, where you can really see that the family contributions are making up a much larger proportion of their overall account value. That's all I have for overall savings. So if people want more, there's lots more in the reports.
So first of all, we should be, I think, I always get slightly pumped up, excited, and enthusiastic when I hear everybody start talking about their programs and what they're trying to do. And the idea of other, people in the community investing in kids and kids getting that feeling of, hey, someone cares about me going to college. I mean, to me, that is extremely motivating. We're going to do a little bit of discussion about takeaways, but we're going to mostly do questions and answers. You can expect in the next 2 to 3 weeks, we'll have out a report that looks at takeaways from all 4 programs. But we had a really lively discussion this morning about it, and I want to be able to incorporate some of those ideas into it. And so we're going to wait and hold off on producing that report or talking too much about takeaways. But there were a few things I thought we had some consensus around that struck me. One we didn't mention that I'll mention that I think is obvious, primarily from C2K work, but I think we've seen the same thing with K2C and with the main project, for short, is that automatic enrollment. If you want to get everybody an account, automatic enrollment is the way to do that, right? I mean, to get everybody an account, automatic enrollment is the best way to do it. 99.9% in C2K, and the same thing, we're seeing the same kinds of things in K2C in Maine as well. So to me, that's just an obvious, it's kind of been established already, but yet this reinforces. Now, I should mention that I don't know if it was painfully clear. Right now, the data that we have from Maine is on the opt-in program, and we're looking forward to looking and exploring the data on the opt-out program. We think we can learn a tremendous amount from looking at opt-in and opt-out, and this is really the only opportunity we have in the country to do that. And so it's really important that we do it right, and that we do it as quickly as we can. So a lot more to come there, which should also, kind of one of the other things we've seen, and I'll mention here, takeaways, there is some difference in savings rates among opt-in programs and opt-out programs for some obvious reasons. One is that opt-out programs includes everyone in the community, right? Whether it be the state or whether it be the city. And in which case we see, we're not calling these rules of thumb because we don't have the evidence to suggest that, but what we see generally is between 8%, I was saying 18%, but we came down to 8% to 30% as kind of an expected savings rate for programs that are starting up that are automatic enrollment. One reason we think these are slightly lower than the other programs is just tons of reasons. Because you can tell from the description of the programs, demographically, policy arenas, there's a whole lot of differences that we can't control for and have not control for, or not even attempted to control for. But you can, as a kind of like a expected, if you're starting an automatic enrollment program, you can tell the goal savings rates are between 8% and 30%. Now with the opt-in programs, we see a savings rate about 40% to 46%. Getting back to one of the reasons is in an opt-out program, in an opt-in program, you have people who are specifically geared towards savings, right? They chose to start the program, and so it might be that they're much more likely, the kinds of people who are much more likely to save in the end. None of this is evidence-based. We need to test these things, but that might be one explanation for the differences we see. It's also just your sample size is far larger in the opt-out programs. So that is to reemphasize the fact that we don't think you should be making comparisons between the programs, but to say that if you're starting these kinds of programs, these are about the rates that we can expect to see. In saying that, and Frank brought up a good point in our earlier discussion, is how do you evaluate that? Is that good or bad? Is based upon your goals and how you look at that. Now, based on national evidence, this suggests that we're doing pretty good in these programs. We have a lot to be kind of excited about, that the rates are much higher than we see nationally. I think the other takeaway, so beyond just kind of, all right, automatic enrollment, that's good. You want to get everybody included, automatic enrollment to go. There are some trade-offs with it, that you might have lower savings rates, but maybe that's okay, because we're also thinking about things like, does it improve social emotional development? Does it improve expectations? Does it create a college-going culture? There's all kinds of reasons for why we start these programs and why they're important. It goes beyond just savings. And what we don't know yet is, over the long term, as we begin to engage in different activities, can we trigger and have more and more of these people, more and more of these families saving in these accounts over time? One last takeaway is, and Megan mentioned it slightly in the last slide, is it is interesting that what we see between Maine and K2C, because that's two of the programs we have low-income data for, is in the beginning, their contributions that low-income families make are very similar to what middle-income families are making, right? And so that's very interesting, the contribution rates. Now, there might be reasons for that. Maybe the higher income families are saving in very different accounts. These are things we'll have to explore. But it is of note that that we have a number of low income people saving, and with regard to in these programs, they're saving relatively the same amounts and on the same contribution levels as well, frequency of contributions, as the middle income families. Now in K2C, we do see that that's more the case early on, and over time that widens some, right? There's bigger differences later on, gaps there. So we have more to learn about that, but it is interesting that we see a fair number of low-income people saving, and that they seem to be contributing at similar, once you get rid of the outliers, right? The really high-income people. And I think, which we need to do in that data, is tease out, like even within that high-income group, there are some families that are making extraordinary amounts of money into those accounts. Now, will even that gap reduce some if we take out those outliers? So those are some things. I'm sure there's a number of other things we need to look at. Certainly would love to have your feedback on things that you see, because these are all draft reports except for the K2C report. And we'll be doing additional analysis and looking at these closer. So as you see things, to the degree we can with the data that we have, we will try to explore and look at those. Lots of research to come in the future from K2C around education outcomes, also promised Indiana, and hopefully Prosperity Kids as well, and then eventually in Maine. And so a lot more to come. So we'll open up to questions at this point. I do want one more thing, sorry. I do want to say a great gratitude and thanks to all the programs for coming, and then for the foundations for supporting it. Not only Forward Foundation, who Frank kind of represents still, and but also Charles Stewart Mott, and then W.K. Kellogg Foundation has supported us in this research a whole lot. And what we're hoping that you see from this research is that it really provides us an opportunity, one of the only opportunities we have, to look kind of what would a national program look like in different locations, right? It gives us the chance to look at across the country, different programs, and how, with different populations, different policies and everything else, how does CSAs play out in those areas? And so we think it's a really important area of research. But most importantly, we thank all of you. That's why we want you to come here, be able to sit and look at you, talk to you, and say thank you for working with us. Thank you for not only being good research partners, and you all know kind of the struggles there are with getting the data together, and you have limited staffs for taking our questions, cleaning the data, and all the stuff that goes into that, and you've all participated 100% in that effort. Many people that aren't here, like Fame, who we've worked with a lot, and many other partners, school districts, and promising that are working so hard so we can provide the data and information to really move these programs forward. And we're of great gratitude. We have just tons of appreciation for all your efforts and your work, what you're doing on a local level. The efforts that you're putting in are monumental. We truly appreciate that partnership and that opportunity to work with you, and really to we do the analysis and all that stuff. That's good, but then also just seeing your passion for the kids, getting to do some of the qualitative work and hearing their stories, and then one day we're going to sit here and we're going to be talking about, we're going to have a party on camera about a national policy that provides every kid with an account, and that actually puts some real money in those accounts and gives them a full opportunity to make a real difference in their life. We're going to celebrate that one day here together. And that will be quite an exciting day.
Yes, it will.
So I'll shut up now. I said it a lot. And we'll do our questions and answers if there are any.
Yeah, so I would encourage, thank you, Willie, and echoing thanks to the folks who are here with us and those who are participating on the webinar, particularly for weathering some of the technical challenges in the beginning. If you had difficulty and missed some of the beginning of it, we did record the webinar and it will be available, and we'll also make the presentations from those who shared them available with the reports as they're finalized. So those of you who were trying to figure out who's that person speaking because I missed the introduction, I will try to answer all of those questions in email follow-up, but also know that you can watch whatever portions you missed in the recording. So I would encourage you to submit questions if you have them, and I'm going to do my best to moderate those as they're coming in. But I do want to open up, we've got enough time, so open it up first to folks from the programs to share some of your thoughts kind of in two directions in terms of the implications of some of these initial findings, both programmatically, what are some of these data and the analysis here making you think in terms of things that you might try or things that you might want to change, so programmatic implications and applications. And then I asked Frank what he thought were important frontiers in children's asset research. And I'd like to hear from you too. I think we would like to hear from you. What questions do you still have about your programs and your programs in your peers? So we'll go in reverse order. So we'll start with Colleen and kind of wind our way around. And I'm going to take capture some of the questions that are starting to come in the webinar, and we'll finish up with as many of those as we have a chance to get through.
Thanks, Melinda. So I guess a couple of quick thoughts off the top of my head would be, I think in terms of implications for the work, if you're seeing us on the camera here, you may have seen I'm jotting notes to myself throughout everyone else's presentations because there are ideas of things that are happening in other programs like ours all over the country that I feel like we're constantly learning from. So for me, that opportunity and the kind of the sharing that happens within the CSA community is really tremendous. I think about wanting to, as helpful as the savings data is to help us understand what's happening with that part of the work that we do, I'm also really eager to understand what the data tells us about the most effective ways to engage with families, or the kinds of behaviors that we want to, savings and non-savings behaviors that we want to encourage parents and kids to engage in. Is it attendance? Is that, is there a causal relationship there that needs further exploration? We can focus a lot of our messaging and encouragement and incentivization on that would have an impact for kids, or are there other elements? So I'm really eager to learn, not only from our own program, but from others around the country about what are the other things we can be doing in addition to encouraging families to save, to get kids where we hope they can get.
Yeah, so the piece from the data that jumped out at me is just the reinforcement that when we look at the kids in the families that are saving, it's not just upper income kids. It's families that are poor families can save, and that's an important piece. They're not saving. They may not be able to save enough to pay to go to college, but they can build that ownership, and they can have that shape their identity, that we're taking steps to move our child forward. And that piece, I'd love to see what the implications of that action is over time, and then how as a community and as a state and from a federal policy perspective, how can we help make those steps really meaningful by getting significant resources in there. So the identity piece, that all families can save, we just need to be finding a way to be able to make it easier for them to do that, is the piece that jumped out at this latest report.
I think, and even if we just look at Indiana, there are a lot of resources available for families to help pay for college. So there's community foundation scholarships, there's 21st Century Scholars, and you throw on Pell Grants. But unfortunately, families, I worked in higher ed for 10 years, and so I have the hindsight to understand how all those pieces fit together. But if you're a first-gen family, it's going to be hard to see how it all fits together. I think a CSA is the glue that brings it all together, and we can incentivize the understanding of the process. Don't expect them to understand everything as a kindergarten parent, but incentivize behaviors along the way, help them figure out the process so that they do sign up for 21st Century Scholars, so that they do apply for Community Foundation scholarships. They understand what the FAFSA is and how to fill it out appropriately. But let's incentivize all those with deposits into their 529 or their CSA program.
So I'm waiting for Willie's party, but I'm not really waiting. Yeah, I think that we all have the experience of really being engaged in creating what works in our communities. And as we're looking at expanding Prosperity Kids in New Mexico, one of the things that we're thinking about, and a model that is affirmed in many ways by the participants here, is community ownership. And we really believe that community ownership can be expanded to congregations, to neighborhoods, to businesses, and really across the board. And we have the idea of creating a future fund, which is investments from everything from state, county, and city governments to individuals and businesses and communities themselves. And so I think that understanding really what works in our place will inform that party that Willie's going to host here very soon.
So just to add a few more to what others have said, I think for us, one area is going to continue to be how do we strengthen engagement of our families. We're pretty excited with our savers rate, but I think there's two challenges. One, there's plenty of people not saving, and we think awareness is a key piece of it. And we know at this point, savings is a proxy for that awareness that they have that college savings account. And so we want to continue to focus on efforts and research efforts to really better understand how to strengthen that engagement. The second piece of it, as I mentioned earlier, amongst our savers, a third of them have only saved once. And so it's also that ongoing, engagement piece of that. And for that, I think, research around better understanding what engages families in these accounts and how much the seed matters and what amount that seed should be, but also how much incentives matter and what is the right design of those incentives to ensure we have programs that are also sustainable. Is a key kind of research area that we're interested in as well. And then I'd say the third piece of it is that integration, both within the community as well as the school. I think for us, as we are in scale and continue to scale, for this to be successful will really require that integration within the school, but also these community efforts to engage the community to build awareness and help families engage in these accounts and be aware of these accounts. And so I'd say that's the third piece.
Might we give Nick and Frank a quick second or not?
Sure. We have some questions that folks are sending in, but sure.
Sure. I would second a lot of what others have said. I think these are all great ideas. Especially thinking about some of these engagement strategies, I do think there's a lot of opportunity to build in very simple research designs as we roll things out in phases to understand what's working and what the relative benefits are, or that we could expect with different kinds of investments or resources. I think there are a lot of ways we can optimize the potency of these programs to be able to make sure that we're getting all the impact we can from the investment. So I think there are ways to do that, and I think it'd be great to think through those possibilities, but it's not necessarily something that's intensive or burdensome or anything like that. I think we can do it relatively easily.
I guess I'll pass because I really want to hear the questions from the audience, but I really want to congratulate the 4 programs here for their creativity. And I think just hearing their take on their implications, I think points, I guess, to the role of family engagement, I think is for me the most critical. How do we get not just the savings rate, but how do we get families engaged? Because I think it is, I said I wasn't going to talk, and now I'm talking, but I do think it is the key of how do you get families engaged in this, not just for the savings rate, but it is for all the other sort of social and emotional components of this, because that's really what we envision. These are, I think, calling them children's savings accounts probably is not the most helpful. They're really development accounts. And so what is it about development that we hope these accounts will promote? It's engagement in the communities, it's social emotional development, it's commitment to going to their development in the future, and what are all those components of development that we think these accounts will engage? Financial inclusion. So how do we think, and these programs I think are leading the way in that. And all of them, I think even Maine's, which now is an opt-out, is also looking at what are the kinds of emotion. I think, and it will be interesting, Colleen, as you start engaging with these kids in kindergarten and school, you're going to start grappling with that as well. So I'd love to see what you come up with.
Got a few ideas.
I'm sure you just hold it.
Okay.
Yeah. So I'm going to apologize in advance if we don't get to your question, but we'll do as many as we can, and then I'll try to funnel them to the right people afterwards. But the first question that came through the feed is about reflections on the vehicle for children's savings accounts, particularly 529 state college savings plans or banks and credit unions. Willie referred to some of our conversation this morning when this came up. So I don't know, Willie, if you want to start with this or who wants to take this first, but a question about whether anything in these findings gave people new insights there, or just kind of where these programs are in their thinking about vehicles for CSAs.
I'll give everybody else a chance first. Does anybody want to say anything on that?
I'm not sure that there's a right or a wrong. The question that we grappled with is what works for the population that we are trying to serve. And when we have a high unbanked and underbanked community that we're working with, we thought that a vehicle to financial inclusion was an account that was very accessible to families, and that was a credit union account, and that has proven to be true. That this level of financial inclusion has been very exciting for families and also for the credit unions that are serving them.
So I'd say for us, very similar. Ours is with a bank, and it's a custodial account. I think it was the right, and I still think it's the right vehicle as a starting point for families. It's easy to understand. It's easy for them to save in it. We're continuing to explore additional deposit channels because I still think we want to make savings even more accessible for the families. But as we're at this point with almost 30,000 accounts, and we see a good amount of savings in some of those accounts, we are starting to explore ways to ensure families can generate more return on their savings. And so we would like to explore the possibility of a hybrid account, which would combine our accounts with a 529 account. I think, that again is important, easy access, easy entry, but the investments and returns are important as well.
And I would only say and speak to our program in Maine that when the program was created, it was deliberately set up within a 529 model, and that was because we wanted to work with an existing infrastructure that already existed, was a platform available to everybody in the state, and it was very important to the board of the Harold Alfond Foundation that the funds were put into a vehicle that had the potential to grow and the assets could accumulate. So that $500, which is already a sizable amount to start families with, really would have the potential to grow. When we look at the data up here in the previous slides from Maine, as you'll see in the report, those assets really, in fact, have grown. And so the $500 has now become $600, $700, $800 for a lot of families. And when families make their own contributions, FAME has a very generous matching program that then adds into that. So that then all gets to a point where families are accumulating dollars that are inspiring to them in terms of the feasibility. When I was at the Mitchell Institute, I used to run a scholarship program in Maine, And we found doing research that there was often a gap between the institutional aid that was available and what families had for resources. And so whether the Alphon grant might come in later and pay for the first year at a community college or a certificate program, or fill the gap for a kid going to a liberal arts institution or the state university, the piece, again, that we hear over and over again from the families is it's real money in a real account for my child. And knowing that it's there, as we all can attest from the interactions we have with families, that's really inspiring to them. And so the vehicle, I think, really depends on I agree with Owen, there's not a right or a wrong answer to that. It depends on what your program goals are and what it is you're trying to do. For us, the asset accumulation was an important goal, so the 529 made sense as the vehicle. Oh, sure.
Our program also uses the 529, and the 529 for the masses that we're serving is really an effective tool. It's that infrastructure that can, allow people to save, earn that interest, have a distribution for qualified educational expenses. We've had to, and we'll continue to work on refinement to the 529 and systems to allow us to be able to serve our vulnerable populations, because there are barriers for deposits. There are barriers that can trip people up and not allow them to have access to participate. And so that's can be local innovation. That's also can be policy changes that make it easy for all kids in our community, in our state, to be able to take advantage and engage in a 529.
So I'm going to say something I said in our discussion earlier today, and I think sometimes if you're a local program, you have to do what's best to serve your people at the moment. There needs to be some energy within the field around how do we adapt 529s to better serve other people or create another mechanism. I'm not, right now, my assessment would be the 529s are the best way to go to scale, right? And so unless we come up with an I'm not I'm not against trying to find a different solution. I think you should try to do everything you can, right? But right now, 529 seem to be our best opportunity for growing to scale. Saying that, I have no problem with us having real discussions around why don't they serve other populations well? And what can we do? Because many of them the problems with 529s are really policy problems that could be solved with policy. And so what we need as a field is some energy and discussion around the what needs to be done to change them, right? And I think sometimes we're afraid of that conversation because we think of them as being the best solution for going to scale. If we critique them in any kind of way, that means maybe they're not the best way to go to scale. But it simply means there are things that need to happen to 529. Simple one is we can't have separate accounts, right? I mean, it's just too much labor for an individual to be automatically enrolled into the account and then have to set up a separate account to actually save. But this is a policy issue. It doesn't necessarily mean that 529s are bad or good. It's something we can solve with policy. And so I think we really just have to, and I think this is the real struggle for us to figure out who does that, because ONA, who's trying to get everybody in the state of New Mexico an account, can't necessarily be bogged down with trying to figure out how to change or leading the charge on adapting 529 programs to better fit. She got to find something that works for her population right now as is. And so as a field, we need to figure out some ways to really address this and have this conversation. I took too long with that.
No, that's okay. If you don't recognize your exact question, it's because I'm trying to pull out themes and kind of cluster them together so that we can get to at least as many of the broad topics as we have here. So in that spirit, there's a question about emergency savings accounts in the Prosperity Kids model, and another question about some of K2C's conversation about like how do you use these accounts to kind of broker relationships and figure out what families are doing with some other of their savings accounts. I think there was a reference to the Office of Financial Empowerment's work around Bank On San Francisco, and like how do you see this as a part of overall financial inclusion activities, I think. And then another question just kind of in general about what other types of financial inclusion strategies need to be kind of bracketed around children's assets to support families altogether. So I think if we can have some discussion around what are programs doing, probably starting with Prosperity Kids, what are programs doing to couple children's asset building initiatives with other financial inclusion strategies? How do children's savings fit in with what cities and other jurisdictions have done around financial access and inclusion? And then maybe some policy pieces that might be necessary for children's assets to be really a vehicle to overall family inclusion. We'll start with Ona, I think.
So the idea of having the emergency account was critical, we thought, to overall stabilization of the family. And we think that that then is a link to families' ability to save. And so that's why we included that and why we think it's really important. Now, in terms of financial inclusion generally for young folks, one of the extensions of what we've done is to begin to ask our credit unions to provide wholly owned accounts by children that they can open under 18 without a parent or guardian. Now, there are several vulnerable populations who are earning money as young people, but are also susceptible to having that money diminished or lost because they don't have a place to save it themselves. So we just completed an effort with an Upward Bound program, for instance, that where 29 kids between 13 and 17 had accounts open for them at the end of their summer institute after we provided financial education to those young people without a parent involvement. So again, it's a policy issue. There's no prohibition at all in our state and in most states against children under 18 having a savings account in their own name without a parent or guardian. So we think that beginning to push the envelope and ask other institutions to do this for kids, then we can encourage savings differently than we have before. And that's an important part of helping kids be included financially early and learning how to manage their money, and also really protecting them from either the cost of cashing their checks or having money that is in their hands that will be spent easily or taken over by a family member who has an emergency.
Oh no, one follow-up question. Do you have any information on the take-up rate of the emergency savings account?
So I think our take-up rate is about 40% of the families chose to do that. And we're not really, those accounts are family accounts only. There's no controls on them. They do whatever they want with those accounts. So as a result, we don't know if the ones who didn't take the accounts have an account someplace else. And we are not also tracking exactly how they're using those accounts, which is probably a mistake.
Do you want to say anything about financial inclusion in San Francisco or how you see K2C fitting into that? That was maybe I poorly paraphrased the question, but I was trying to amalgamate here.
No, I will do my best to answer that. I think with kindergarten to college and that program, a key piece of it is really about that financial inclusion and starting kids on that path sooner rather than later. We see from our work with Bank On that we're bringing adults into mainstream financial institutions later in life, and that's partially because those programs and products weren't really designed and accessible to them when they were younger. And so this is a way to really provide that financial inclusion and integrate that financial inclusion through the schools with financial education to really build financial capability early on for students. And then this sits within the Office of Financial Empowerment, which has other programs that are very much focused on financial inclusion and financial capability. I mentioned our Bank On program. We also have a Summer Job Connect program, which is working with youth 18 or 14 to 24 and connects them to a non-custodial credit union account when they have their first job, usually summer employment. And the idea there is, again, let's bring them into mainstream financial institutions sooner and help them avoid more of the predatory financial services and practices and build in financial capability sooner to help them on that path. And so we continue to look at other programs and efforts to strengthen financial inclusion and empowerment in San Francisco.
Would you say something?
I would just share that utilizing the 529, one of the barriers is not being able to do cash deposits, and so one of the workarounds, it's really an inclusion piece, is allowing and setting up a local option with local banking institutions to allow people to come in and do cash deposits. It doesn't require an account at the bank. They can come in, they can make a deposit either into their child's account or at the Champion. And so we've taken that step. We've also structured it in a way that it's open in one account, and when they open their account, they have immediate opportunities to do deposits into that account, have the protected money in the custodial account, but then giving context to that 529, because traditionally you're going to get investment options on a quarterly basis, and much like you saw in Colleen's report, having the ability to customize those monthly reports so that it feels like, hey, this is about your program, this is about your child, and it's not just about this is your investment strategies and here's how much assets you have, but putting that context allows, I think it lessens that overwhelming feeling that families that don't have exposures to assets and investments, typically feel when they open up that report.
And the quick piece I would add for our program is that for us, the financial inclusion is the automatic universal nature, obviously. But the other piece that we're really trying to do and looking ahead to doing is around if you remember the Venn diagram, that education messaging as one of those circles on the Venn diagram. And we're particularly looking at that new My Alphon Grant website as an opportunity to provide good information and resources to family, including growing out. I mentioned earlier that My Plan part, and we're looking at partnering with a couple of different potential organizations around financial literacy, and so that a parent might develop a plan that would be, I'm going to save $10, this month or in whatever time period. I'm going to make sure my kid gets to school on time or has good attendance, and I'm going to complete this module of the financial literacy piece. And so, for us, the inclusion is really kind of broadening that access to good information, which is really lacking for a lot of families. So we're not trying to get unbanked people banked. That's not a goal of our particular program. But the financial literacy piece is really important to us.
Thank you. We're getting close to the 2-hour mark, but we have time for at least one and maybe 2 questions, depending on how we go. So the next one starts with Promise Indiana. There was a specific question about, you said, Clint, it's not replication, it's activation in different communities. So a question about what are the differences between some of those different community models or county models? But then I think a question somewhat more broadly too, like how do you get a community activated around college saving? And then we'll hopefully go from you to Frank, because there was a particular question about, Frank said, what kind of engagement is needed for development if we think about these as accounts for development, and how do we measure that? What besides savings do you think we should be looking at in terms of measures of activation or engagement on the part of families? But first, a little bit more on what you guys do with those Promise models.
So whether you're approaching it from the human development in helping all kids have access and opportunities, or whether you're approaching it from a community development, that in order to be successful in the next 20, 30, 40 years, we need to develop a qualified workforce, one that has the credentials and degrees to attract and retain jobs. No matter where you come from the work, it's important that we're creating those pathways. And so it's not hard to rally various sectors of a community around this piece because of the early research that's been done on the power of asset building. I'll pass it to Phil to give some specifics.
So we have a competitive application process for our program, so communities that want to be involved have to go through a specific process. And we have identified now doing this for 4 years and with 18 counties, what are the key metrics that are going to make a community successful? You know, having superintendents that are on board, having schools bought in, having a community foundation involved, faith-based organizations. And so we designed the application to walk communities through what's the things I need to do to get ready. So if you're a runner and you have a running plan to get you ready for that marathon, each of those runs is designed to get you ready for that day to race. And so we've put together an application that walks all these communities through the process to get ready for that launch so that there is success. And it's activation because what happens in Indianapolis is different than what happens in Wabash County. And so sometimes it's a county-wide effort like in Wabash. Sometimes it's what we call a hub strategy in Indianapolis, where we have public schools, charter schools, after-school programs. We have the Metropolitan Youth Orchestra, which teaches music lessons to both parents and kids, talking about college savings accounts within their context. College Mentors for Kids, the Indiana After School Network, YMCAs, and Boys and Girls Clubs. They're all working with kids within their local context. And they take our model and then they figure, all right, what are the goals that we're trying to accomplish? And let's use Promise Indiana to meet those goals. And so it's not replicating what we did in Wabash, but it's using the CSA to reach their goals.
And just to add, in every community, there are challenges, there are barriers, there are unique sets of limitations or things that need to be addressed. But in every community that we've worked with and it's applying, there are also communication strategies. There's also resources that are waiting to be unleashed. And so finding those unique things to address the communities is part of the activation. It's not always the same.
Hate to put you on the spot. Would you be willing to share an application, or is that something that's
Share what the application looks like? Yeah, the application process is available on that Promise Indiana website.
So we're trying to put a link to it or something?
We'll put a link to it, and just it helps communities. And then the other component that we're tasked with as we work with the state is helping people in those communities work through that readiness process. And what does it look like to have a community come around and have this conversation, and everybody's saying, hey, I'm in on this, I'll do this, I can do this, we need to have these people. And so we help facilitate that in these exploring communities. And so there's 18 communities that have launched, and we're currently working with 35 communities that are in that exploration of what does it look like in our local setting, and how can we do this because our community and our kids need it. And if it's possible somewhere else, why isn't it possible here? And so the proof points in the research and also the proof points in the programs, that's I think one of the reasons why we see the explosion of CSA programs, because of we have the proof points, and so now it's able to people can see it, and when people can see it, people can start moving towards it.
So that's a sense of what engagement looks like at the community level. Frank, do you have thoughts on kind of other indicators that research should be looking at for engagement at the family level?
Well, I think there's two things, I guess. One is the notion of creating assets as you change the hypothesis, you change the way people think about the future and the way that they fit within that future. So in other words, do people think about themselves differently? Do they change their own expectations about what they can do? Do they change the expectations of their parents about what both the children can do and what the parents themselves can do for their kids? So educational aspirations, educational performance, in terms of their socio-emotional development, all kinds of scales that you can look at. Do they change the way the kids behave, their athletic? So all of that, I think, is beyond, I mean, savings are a means to an end, but then what are those ends? How do they change all that? So that's, for me, that's the engagement that you're trying to look at. And, you know, so you can look at all of the researchers come out of the Seed Oklahoma study, which has been measuring now, there's paper after paper that looks at way beyond savings. It's all this maternal depression, social emotional development, all of that, parents' expectations, children's expectations. So that to me, I mean, the area where there's the least research is family engagement. You know, and that's, I think, you've been hearing from the organizations in this room, trying to think about how do we, you know, K2C, how do we promote greater family engagement, thinking, well, that will then lead to greater savings, but it also may lead to better school performance in some way. And I think, Willie, you're going with your future research, you're going to be looking at some of the educational performance But I hope that's the way to the future, to go beyond, well, if you have savings, what does that lead you to do? If that's changing your perception of yourself and your parents' perception, what are the behavioral manifestations that come from that? So I don't know if I've answered that question. But
So we did not get to all of the questions, but we are at the 2-hour mark here. So Willie, would you like to do any kind of closing for folks? And I've got emails and comments about the recording being available for viewing later, and the slides and things. So just another reminder for those who may have missed it that we will make those things available online for folks to use as a resource.
Yeah, once again, I want to thank everybody for coming. You know, you had to travel a lot of you long distance away, so really appreciative of that. I also want to thank all the viewers for taking your time. I know it was a bit long, and we do apologize for the confusion in the beginning and getting started late. We're a new facility, doing new thing, and we get really excited about our conversations we were having before. So all those things, I do apologize for that. We'll try to improve on that. We have to thank the University of Michigan and all its staff for helping us. We do think as we grow here, we'll be able to produce cleaner reports. Sometimes, like right now, we're using our Word document to create our reports, and we need more advanced systems to be able to create more standardized reports that have clearer tables and all those kind of things. And I think we'll have access to more of that. I do want to put a real thought in people's minds about, I do think we need a center or something, a think tank or something that is really actively engaged in helping programs work within their political systems, engage their political systems to help them, that engage at the national level, but also the state and local level, because the programs have a little too much heaped up on them right now, and the expectations are high of them. And so we have to find ways as a unified field to create some help for them so they can better do what they're trying to do. And we can't expect them to lead the way on a lot of these policy issues because they're trying to make their programs work on a day-to-day basis, which is a tremendous amount of effort. And then they have researchers like myself and others coming in and asking them tons of questions for tons of data, and they have to find a way to get it all done and get it to us. And so we have to find somehow as a field some resources to aid these programs and to take some of the load off them. They can't possibly staff up enough to do everything they need to do. And so we have to be able to bring some people in to help them at appropriate times. And I think if we really want to go to a national level, and it's still going to have local connections, even at the national level, is we're going to have this kind of infrastructure in place somewhere. And right now that's missing. And I think that's one last thing is we have to be able to do surveys in these programs that we're talking about right here so that we can collect more data on things other than savings, right? Or even just blank school outcomes, right? We need something more different than math and reading. And to do that, we have to run surveys, which takes money and takes energy. And so we need to do some active work at getting some funding for these things. And COK is tremendous. It's tremendous, right? But being able to look across the country at these different programs is also going to be a key part of creating momentum for a national policy. So we can't let that doesn't diminish COK. It just means we have to do these other things as well.
You need to be able to look at different contexts.
Yeah.
You look across programs. You need to understand what people are thinking about within these contexts, because the context makes a difference. And COK was a statewide randomized controlled trial. You couldn't take into account context, and that's what's missing.
So it's that meta-analysis.
Yeah, but also I think for me, what is exciting is now you are getting to a place where there is so much momentum out there in programs to be able to capture that across the programs. I think change is not linear. Change is geometric. And I think you're on, where we are on that geometric curve, we don't quite know yet, but I think being able to harness that. So I think you're going to see the rate of change. As you said before, change happens more when you're in chaos. And we're in some point of that chaos. Where we are, not quite clear, but that's what makes it so exciting. So thank you, Willie, for actually making all this happen. So really appreciate it.
Glad to be a part of it. Anybody else have a closing comment? I know we don't have much time. This last word, anybody? So I'll close it out there. Thanks again, everybody. We're excited. We didn't do anything perfect. but we're going to get it together and we're going to make a real charge here in the next few months. Thanks a lot.